The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers sealed shut with a sound that echoed through dimensions. Ambassador David Grant stood alone in the center of the crystalline arena, surrounded by towering galleries that stretched upward into shadows. Above him, 500 representatives from across the known galaxy looked down with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering that defied human understanding. Floating platforms held delegates whose very existence challenged the laws of physics. Beings of pure energy flickered beside crystalline entities that sang in harmonic frequencies. Insectoid creatures with mandibles the size of starship hulls clicked in rhythmic patterns, while gaseous life forms swirled in containment fields that pulsed with inner light. High Counselor Drix raised all four of his arms, and the chamber fell silent. His species, the hegemony, had ruled the galactic core for over 2 million years. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority that had never been challenged. "Human," Drix began, the translation matrix making his words ring clearly through the vast space. "Your species stands accused of the most serious violation of galactic law in recorded history. You have been observed constructing weapons of planetary destruction. You have militarized space beyond your authorized boundaries. You have violated 47 separate treaties governing the conduct of junior species." Grant remained perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. He had trained for this moment for 15 years, but nothing could have prepared him for the raw power that radiated from the assembled delegates. Each one represented a civilization that could reduce Earth to cosmic dust with a single command. "These accusations are supported by irrefutable evidence," continued Counselor. This of the Serpentine Alliance, her scaled form coiling around her speaking platform with predatory grace. "Our deep space monitors have detected battle stations positioned throughout your solar system. Weapons capable of cracking moons. Ships armed with technology that should not exist in the hands of such a young species." The chamber erupted in supporting sounds from dozens of species. Harmonic resonances from the energy beings, clicking mandibles from the insectoids, and guttural roars from creatures that looked like living mountains. The message was clear. Humanity had overstepped its boundaries in the most spectacular way possible. Grant waited for the noise to subside before speaking. When he did, his voice carried clearly through the translation matrix, reaching every corner of the vast chamber. "Honored representatives," he began, using the traditional formal address that had opened diplomatic sessions for millennia. "I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's recent activities." "Misunderstanding?" Drix's four eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you suggesting that our deep space reconnaissance is flawed? That our sensor networks, which have monitored galactic activities for longer than your species has existed, have somehow failed to correctly identify military installations?" The threat in his voice was unmistakable. The hegemony sensor networks were legendary for their precision. To question their accuracy was tantamount to calling the entire Galactic Council incompetent. "Not at all," Grant replied calmly. "Your sensors are functioning perfectly. They have indeed detected massive military installations throughout human space. What I'm suggesting is that you may have misunderstood their purpose." Several delegates shifted uneasily. Grant's tone carried something they weren't expecting. Not fear or submission, but something that sounded almost like confidence. "The purpose is clear," declared Admiral Core of the Valiant Defense Fleet, his mechanical voice booming through the chamber. "Your species seeks to challenge galactic authority. You build weapons to threaten your betters. This is the pattern of every aggressive species that has ever been brought before this council." "I see," Grant said quietly. "And what happened to those other aggressive species, Admiral?" The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Everyone in the chamber knew the answer. Species that challenged galactic authority simply ceased to exist. Their worlds were pacified, their populations relocated to supervised colonies, their technology confiscated. It was the natural order that had maintained peace for millions of years. Drix stood to his full imposing height, all four arms spread wide in a gesture of final authority. "Human, you have exactly 48 hours to surrender unconditionally. Dismantle your military installations. Submit your technology for inspection. Accept permanent galactic oversight of your species' development." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the chamber, delegates from hundreds of worlds nodded in approval. This was how things worked. This was how they had always worked, and if we refuse? Grant asked. Then the combined might of the Galactic Defense Force will demonstrate why younger species show proper respect to their elders, Drix replied. His voice carried the absolute confidence of someone who had never been defeated, never been challenged, never been wrong. Grant nodded slowly, as if considering the ultimatum carefully. Several delegates leaned forward, expecting to see the collapse that always came at this moment, the moment when defiant species realized the futility of resistance and submitted to galactic authority. Instead, Grant smiled. It was not the expression of a defeated ambassador. It was not the smile of someone accepting an ultimatum. It was something else entirely, something that sent an unexpected chill through the more perceptive delegates in the chamber. "High Counselor," Grant said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, "before you make any final decisions about humanity's fate, I think you should check your deep space monitors again. More carefully this time." As if summoned by his words, a junior technician burst through the chamber's side entrance, moving with the desperate urgency of someone carrying impossible news. The technician rushed to Drix's platform, whispering urgently into the High Counselor's auditory receptors. Grant watched as Drix's four eyes widened, his confident expression cracking like ice under pressure. The High Counselor's powerful form actually staggered backward, one hand gripping his platform for support. "What exactly?" Grant asked into the growing silence, his voice now carrying an edge that made several delegates unconsciously recoil. "Did you think those battle stations were defending against?" The question hung in the air like a cosmic revelation. In the sudden quiet of the chamber, delegates began to realize that they might have completely misunderstood the situation. The human standing before them was not a defendant pleading for mercy. He was someone trying to save them all. The emergency session convened within 3 hours, but the magnificent chamber now felt different. The absolute confidence that had defined the Galactic Council for millions of years had been replaced by something far more dangerous: uncertainty. High Counselor Drix stood before the main display, his forearms trembling slightly as he gestured toward the tactical readout that dominated the chamber. What the assembled delegates saw defied everything they thought they knew about the structure of known space. "Our deep space reconnaissance has detected massive artificial structures," Drix announced, his voice lacking its earlier commanding tone, "located approximately 60 light-years beyond human territory, arranged in what appears to be a defensive perimeter around this entire galactic sector." The display showed structures that challenged comprehension. Space installations the size of moons dotted the void in a rough sphere around human space. They were clearly artificial, but built using technology that registered as completely unknown to the galaxy's most advanced sensor networks. These installations were not present during our last comprehensive survey 15 years ago, reported Admiral Core of the Valiant Defense Fleet, his mechanical voice carrying an edge of disbelief. "They appear to have been constructed in absolute secrecy, using engineering principles that our databases cannot identify." Ambassador Grant stood in the center of the chamber, no longer positioned as a defendant, but somehow having become the focus of everyone's desperate attention. The human appeared calm, almost relaxed, as if the discovery was exactly what he had been expecting. 15 years, Grant mused, his voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. "Yes, that timeline sounds about right. That was when we first detected them approaching our galaxy." "Them?" hissed Counselor Thys, her serpentine form coiled so tightly around her platform that the metal began to creak under the pressure. "What do you mean by them?" Grant gestured toward the display showing the mysterious structures. "The Harvesters. The Void Fleet, the Dark Swarm. They have many names throughout galactic history, though most civilizations that encounter them do not survive long enough to maintain detailed records." The chamber fell into shocked silence. Several delegates began frantic consultations with their homeworld databases, searching for any reference to the names Grant had mentioned. "You speak of legends," Drix declared, but his voice carried uncertainty rather than conviction. "Ancient myths. Stories told by spacers to frighten new recruits. Are they myths?" Grant asked mildly. He turned to address the chamber's central control system. "Display authorization Grant Delta 7. Show them the deep space array recordings." The chamber's main display flickered and changed. What appeared next caused several delegates to recoil in horror. Massive biomechanical vessels moved through the void between galaxies, Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands upon thousands. An armada of living ships, each the size of a small continent, consuming everything in their path as they traveled. They are not specifically targeting Earth, Grant continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. They are not coming for human territory or human resources. They are coming for this entire galactic arm. Every world, every station, every form of life they encounter becomes raw material for their expansion. The crystalline delegate from the Valorian collective pulsed with rapid, panicked light patterns. If this threat is real, why did your species not warn the Galactic Council? Why maintain secrecy about such a danger? Grant's expression hardened, and for the first time since entering the chamber, his diplomatic mask slipped to reveal something much more dangerous underneath. Because the last 4 times humanity attempted to share critical intelligence with the Galactic Council, we were dismissed as paranoid newcomers, ignored as irrelevant, or accused of fabricating data to gain political advantage. Your own diplomatic records will confirm this pattern. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably as they recalled those previous human warnings. Reports about unstable wormhole formations that had been dismissed as sensor errors. Warnings about aggressive probe activities that had been ignored as human paranoia. Intelligence about rogue AI networks that had been discarded as fabrication. So we stopped asking for permission, Grant continued. We stopped waiting for galactic approval. We stopped expecting help from civilizations that viewed us as nothing more than useful labor for their mining operations. What exactly have you done? Demanded Admiral Core, his mechanical form clicking with nervous energy. Grant gestured again toward the display. Those military installations your sensors detected? Those battle stations that sparked this diplomatic crisis? They are not pointed inward toward galactic civilization. They are not weapons designed to threaten established powers. He paused, letting the implications sink in before delivering the revelation that would change everything. They are the first line of defense for this entire sector of the galaxy. Every weapon, every ship, every defensive installation humanity has built over the past 15 years has been designed for one purpose: to stop the harvesters before they reach the inner systems where billions of innocent lives hang in the balance. The weight of truth settled over the chamber like a heavy shroud. The species they had brought here to judge for military aggression had been preparing to defend them all. How long do we have? Asked Drix quietly, his forearms hanging limply at his sides. Current projections indicate 18 months until the Harvester Vanguard reaches the Outer Rim territories, Grant replied. 24 months until they begin consuming inhabited systems. After that, the timeline accelerates exponentially as they convert destroyed civilizations into additional ships and weapons. The mathematical horror of it was undeniable. Each world the harvesters consumed would make them stronger, faster, more capable of consuming the next target. It was a cascade effect that would devour the entire galaxy within a generation. Why should we trust you? Demanded Counselor Thys, her serpentine form writhing with barely controlled panic. How do we know this is not an elaborate deception designed to gain sympathy and avoid consequences for your illegal militarization? Grant looked directly at her, and his expression carried the weight of someone who had seen too much, planned for too long, and carried burdens that no single species should bear alone. Because, Counselor, if we wanted to conquer the galaxy, we would not need an elaborate deception. We would not need to ask permission, and we certainly would not need to warn you first. The chamber fell silent as the implications of that statement settled over the assembled delegates. The human standing before them was not pleading for understanding or begging for mercy. He was offering them a choice: cooperation or extinction. And for the first time in galactic history, the choice was not theirs to make. Admiral Kate Morrison stood before the largest tactical display ever constructed, watching real-time feeds from humanity's deep space monitoring network stream across multiple dimensional layers. The converted asteroid facility, originally designed as a mining operation, now served as the command center for the most desperate military campaign in galactic history. Show them the full tactical analysis, Morrison ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent the last decade preparing for this exact moment. The chamber filled with holographic displays, showing the approaching harvester fleet in horrifying detail. Unlike the simplified representation shown to the Galactic Council, these revealed the true scope of the threat approaching their galaxy. Biomechanical vessels that grew stronger by consuming matter, converting destroyed ships and planets into additional forces. High Counselor Drix studied the data with all four eyes, while representatives from every major galactic power crowded around subsidiary displays. The arrogance that had defined galactic politics for millions of years had been replaced by desperate urgency and barely controlled fear. "Your species has been planning this defense operation for how long?" asked General Torin of the Hegemony Defense Force, his insectoid features clicking with nervous energy. 63 years, Morrison replied without hesitation. "Since we first intercepted their deep space communication signals, we have been building, preparing, and developing countermeasures while pretending to be nothing more than an ambitious frontier species." "Impossible," declared Commander Zell of the Valorian Crystal Fleet, his crystalline form pulsing with disbelief. "No single species could coordinate such a massive undertaking without detection by our monitoring systems." Dr. Rebecca Park stepped forward, her diplomatic credentials temporarily set aside in favor of her primary role as humanity's chief xenobiological warfare specialist. "That assumption is based on conventional military thinking. You are monitoring for traditional shipbuilding signatures, energy weapon construction, and standard defensive infrastructure. We built something entirely different." The display shifted to show the interior of one of humanity's battle stations. Instead of gleaming metal corridors and conventional weapon arrays, the structures contained vast organic chambers filled with what appeared to be living tissue connected to complex biological systems. "We have been studying harvester biology for decades through captured scout organisms and recovered debris," Park explained, her voice carrying the excitement of a scientist finally able to share revolutionary discoveries. "They are not truly alive in any conventional sense. More accurately, they are self-replicating biomechanical constructs that use organic components as their primary building material." "What kind of advantage does this knowledge provide?" Drix demanded, his forearms gesturing impatiently. "Biological warfare," Morrison said simply. "Engineered viral agents, targeted pathogens, weaponized diseases designed specifically to exploit their biomechanical nature. We have developed 19 different infectious agents, each one capable of spreading through their fleet like wildfire." The alien delegates exchanged uneasy glances. The species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers had been secretly developing weapons of biological mass destruction for over half a century. The implications were staggering. "But effective deployment requires close-range engagement," Morrison continued, her tone shifting to match the gravity of what she was about to propose. "Our battle stations can launch the initial biological payload, but for maximum effectiveness, we need to introduce infected material directly into the heart of their fleet." "A suicide mission," observed Admiral Core, his mechanical voice carrying grim understanding. "Not necessarily," Park interjected, pulling up additional tactical data. "The harvester's feeding behavior follows predictable patterns. They consume destroyed vessels to repair existing ships and construct new ones. If we can make them consume infected material, their greatest strength becomes their fatal weakness." The strategy became clear to everyone in the chamber. Humanity had not just built defenses against the harvesters. They had designed an elaborate trap that would turn the enemy's biological absorption process into a vector for their own destruction. "The mathematics are sound," continued Park, highlighting infection spread models on the display. "Each infected vessel they consume spreads the pathogen to dozens of others. Within hours, the contamination cascades through their entire fleet structure. Within days, their biomechanical systems begin complete systemic failure. This plan requires unprecedented cooperation between our military forces," Morrison stated, looking directly at the assembled galactic leadership. "Ships from every major power, operating under unified command, executing coordinated strikes against targets that represent an existential threat to all life in this galaxy." The weight of the moment settled over the chamber. For the first time in galactic history, the survival of every civilized world depended on absolute cooperation between species that had spent millions of years competing for resources and territory. "What are the projected casualty rates?" asked Counselor Thiss, her serpentine form unnaturally still. Morrison's expression hardened. "Conservative estimates suggest 40% fleet losses. Optimistic projections put it at 25%. If the biological weapons fail to achieve full saturation, we could lose everything." The brutal honesty of her assessment silenced the chamber. They were not discussing a conventional military engagement with acceptable losses and strategic objectives. They were planning a desperate gamble with the survival of galactic civilization as the stakes. There is one additional factor you must understand, Morrison added, her voice carrying a weight that made several delegates lean forward. If this defensive operation fails, if the harvesters successfully penetrate our bioweapon barriers, then every world in this galaxy becomes a resource depot for their expansion into other galactic arms. She gestured toward a galactic map showing projected harvester expansion patterns. They do not stop. They do not negotiate. They do not leave survivors to rebuild. They consume everything and move on to the next galaxy, leaving empty void where civilizations once flourished. The question before this assembly, Morrison concluded, her gaze sweeping across representatives from hundreds of worlds, is whether you are willing to trust humanity to coordinate this defense. Because if the answer is no, then this conversation ends here, and every species returns to their homeworlds to wait for extinction. The silence that followed stretched until High Counselor Drix finally spoke. His four voices unified for the first time since the crisis began. What do you need from us, Admiral? Morrison smiled grimly. Everything you have. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical advantage your species has developed over millions of years of galactic dominance. And the absolute trust that humanity will use these resources to save us all. The die was cast. For the first time in galactic history, every major civilization would place their fate in the hands of the species they had once considered too dangerous to trust with basic defensive weapons. The transformation of the Galactic Defense Force happened with stunning speed. Within 6 weeks, the combined fleets of 47 star systems had completely restructured their military doctrine around humanity's biological warfare strategy. Ships designed for territorial disputes and police actions were being retrofitted for the most desperate battle in recorded galactic history. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned Joint Command Vessel Galactic Dawn, watching as hegemony battlecruisers took formation alongside Valorian crystal ships and serpentine stealth destroyers. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier when these same fleets had been preparing to humble humanity. Human fleet reports all systems operational, announced Lieutenant Brooks from the communications station. Bioweapon delivery systems are armed and synchronized across all participating vessels. The main display showed the edge of known space, where humanity's deep space monitoring stations had been tracking the harvester fleet's relentless approach. The enemy had already consumed 4 uninhabited star systems, their biomechanical ships growing visibly larger and more numerous with each feeding cycle. They are accelerating beyond projected parameters, reported the Valorian sensor specialist, her crystalline form pulsing with urgent light patterns. Current tracking data indicates first contact in approximately 8 hours. Vasquez nodded grimly. The enemy was moving faster than even humanity's worst-case scenarios had predicted. All ships prepare for Operation Biological Dawn. This is not a drill. The plan was audacious beyond anything attempted in galactic military history. Rather than meet the harvesters in traditional ship-to-ship combat, the Allied fleet would allow the biomechanical swarm to partially overrun their defensive positions. Specially modified vessels, crewed by volunteers from every major species, would deliberately sacrifice themselves while carrying humanity's biological weapons directly into the enemy formation. Admiral Morrison sends her final tactical update, Brooks reported, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. The deep space battle stations are ready to provide covering fire and secondary biological deployment if the primary wave encounters complications. Through the bridge viewports, Vasquez could see the Allied fleet spreading into the carefully planned formation that had been rehearsed countless times over the past month. Each ship had been equipped with human-designed biological warfare systems, their crews trained in deployment protocols that humanity had developed through decades of secret preparation. Contact, detected at grid reference 77 Alpha, announced Admiral Core from his mechanical command platform. All vessels report combat readiness. The irony was not lost on anyone in the command center. The species that had been brought before the Galactic Council as a threat to interstellar peace was now coordinating the defense of every civilized world in the galaxy. They are emerging from hyperspace now, clicked the hegemony sensor operator with barely controlled panic. Multiple contacts. Hundreds of contacts. By the void, there are thousands of them. The tactical display filled with sensor contacts as the harvester fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Biomechanical vessels the size of cities stretched across space in patterns that seemed to pulse with malevolent intelligence. Each ship was a fusion of organic and mechanical components, grown rather than built, capable of self-repair and continuous expansion. Confirmed visual on the Vanguard formation, reported the long-range scanning station. They are moving in predictable feeding patterns, following energy signatures and metal concentrations exactly as human intelligence predicted. Vasquez activated the fleet-wide communication system, her voice reaching every ship in the massive defensive formation. All vessels, this is Commander Vasquez aboard Galactic Dawn. Today we fight not for territory, not for resources, not for political advantage. Today we fight for the fundamental right of life to exist in this galaxy. She paused, watching as the Harvester Vanguard accelerated toward their positions with the inexorable hunger that had already consumed countless civilizations across multiple galaxies. Every species represented in this fleet has contributed their greatest technological achievements to this moment. The Valorians have provided crystal matrix energy systems. The hegemony has shared their quantum targeting computers. The Serpentines have offered their stealth field generators, and humanity has provided the biological weapons that represent our only chance of survival. The Allied fleet hung in space like a living constellation, ships from dozens of worlds united for the first time in galactic history by the absolute necessity of cooperation in the face of extinction. Remember, Vasquez continued, the sacrifice ships have volunteered for this mission. They understand that success requires them to be consumed by the enemy while carrying our biological payloads. Their courage will be remembered by every world that survives what comes next. On the tactical display, the first wave of sacrifice ships began their approach toward the Harvester formation. These vessels had been stripped of all defensive systems and packed with humanity's most potent biological weapons. Each one carried enough infectious agents to contaminate dozens of enemy ships through the Harvester's feeding absorption. Process Harvester fleet is responding to our approach, reported the Tactical Analysis Station. They are accelerating toward the sacrifice ships exactly as predicted. Beginning feeding preparation protocols. All remaining vessels, Vasquez ordered, prepare for maximum dispersal pattern. Once the biological weapons begin spreading through their fleet, we need to be ready to exploit the resulting chaos. The moment had arrived. Decades of human preparation, months of unprecedented galactic cooperation, and the survival of billions of innocent lives all balanced on the next few hours of combat. First contact in 30 seconds, announced the countdown operator. All sacrifice ships report ready for biological payload deployment. Vasquez gripped the command rail, watching as the fate of the galaxy unfolded on the screens before her. Today we discover whether humanity's greatest strength is enough to save us all. The Harvester fleet engulfed the first wave of sacrifice ships like a tide of mechanical hunger, completely unaware that they were consuming their own destruction. The battle lasted 19 hours and 47 minutes. Ambassador David Grant stood in the observation deck of Defense Station Alpha, watching as the last Harvester bioship convulsed in its death throes before going dark in the void. The biological weapons had performed exactly as designed, spreading through the enemy fleet like cosmic wildfire and turning their own absorption-feeding behavior into the vector for complete annihilation. But victory had demanded a terrible price. 38% of the Allied fleet had been sacrificed, along with over 15,000 volunteers who had piloted infected vessels directly into the heart of the enemy formation. Their names would be carved into monuments on every world that survived because of their courage. High Counselor Drix approached the observation platform, his four heads bearing expressions Grant had never seen before. Humility, profound respect, and something approaching awe. The transformation in the Galactic Council's leadership had been as complete as their military victory. Your species fought with strategic brilliance that we thought impossible for such a young civilization, Drix said quietly, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. You prepared for a threat we refused to acknowledge, developed weapons we could never have imagined, and coordinated a defense that saved every inhabited world in this galaxy. Grant nodded, his attention still focused on the debris field that had once been an extinction-level threat, floating silently through space. Humanity has always excelled at preparing for worst-case scenarios. It is both our greatest strength and our defining characteristic as a species. The Galactic Council will require complete restructuring, continued Drix, gesturing toward the mixed fleet of ships from dozens of worlds working together in the aftermath of their shared victory. Our entire approach to interstellar governance has been proven fundamentally inadequate. We will need new leadership structures, new perspectives, new ways of thinking about galactic security. Perhaps, Grant replied carefully, but that is a conversation for another time. Right now we have debris to clear, survivors to rescue, and defensive systems to rebuild. The universe remains a dangerous place, and we have all learned that lesson in the most dramatic way possible. Through the station's massive viewports, ships from dozens of species worked together to begin the enormous cleanup operation. Hegemony vessels assisted damaged Valorian crystal ships, while Serpentine stealth destroyers coordinated search and rescue operations for escape pods scattered across the battle zone. Dr. Rebecca Park joined them at the observation window, her research tablet displaying final casualty reports and biological weapon effectiveness analysis. The pathogenic agents performed beyond our most optimistic projections, she reported with scientific satisfaction. Complete fleet termination, with minimal collateral damage to Allied forces, and the galaxy discovers that the species they attempted to intimidate for excessive militarization was the only thing standing between them and complete annihilation, Grant observed with bitter irony. There will be questions, Drix warned, his four voices carrying concern, about humanity's other preparations, other weapon systems, other contingency plans you may have developed in secret while the galaxy ignored your warnings. Grant turned to face the High Counselor directly, his expression serious but not threatening. Counselor, let me be absolutely clear about something that everyone in this galaxy needs to understand. Humanity has been scanning deep space for potential threats since we first achieved interstellar travel capability. The Harvesters were simply the most immediate danger we identified. Drix's four eyes widened simultaneously as the implications became clear. You mean there are others? Ancient machine intelligences from the galactic core, quantum predators that exist partially outside normal space-time, energy parasites that feed on stellar formations, hive minds that convert entire star systems into computational matrices. Grant's voice carried the weight of knowledge that no single species should possess alone. The universe is filled with threats that could destroy all of us if we face them individually. The alien leader stood in stunned silence, processing the revelation that the galaxy faced not one cosmic threat, but dozens of potential extinction events that required constant vigilance and preparation. But there is a crucial difference now, Grant continued, gesturing toward the mixed fleet working together in space beyond the viewports. Today proved that when the galaxy cooperates completely, when we combine our knowledge and resources and strategic capabilities, we can overcome threats that would destroy us if we remain divided. What role would humanity accept in this new galactic structure? Drix asked quietly. Grant smiled, the same expression that had unsettled the Galactic Council months earlier when this crisis began. But now it carried a different meaning, not a threat to galactic stability, but a promise of protection against cosmic horrors that lurked in the darkness between stars. The same role we have always fulfilled, High Counselor. We will continue watching the empty spaces between galaxies, monitoring for signals that indicate approaching danger, developing countermeasures against threats that most civilizations cannot even imagine. And when the next crisis comes, we will make certain that every world in this galaxy is prepared to face it together. Outside the observation windows, the debris field of the Harvester fleet continued to drift silently through space, a monument to the day the galaxy learned that sometimes the most dangerous species in the universe might also be its most dedicated protector. There is one more thing you should understand, Grant added, his voice carrying a note of gentle warning. Those deep space monitoring arrays that detected the Harvesters, they never stop scanning. They never stop analyzing. They never stop preparing for whatever might be approaching our galaxy from the cosmic void. Drix nodded slowly, finally beginning to comprehend the true scope of humanity's long-term strategic thinking. You are saying that this victory is just the beginning. Exactly, Grant confirmed. The Harvester threat has been eliminated, but the universe is vast and filled with dangers we have not yet encountered. The difference is that now, when those threats reveal themselves, The galaxy will face them as a unified civilization, rather than as scattered, competing species. In the depths of space, humanity's deep monitoring arrays continued their eternal vigil, scanning frequencies that most species could not detect, watching for patterns that indicated approaching cosmic horrors, preparing defenses against threats that had not yet been discovered. The war against the Harvesters was over, but the watch that protected galactic civilization would never end. And for the first time in cosmic history, humanity would not be watching alone.